Bicester Heritage is like a theme park for car nerds. This former RAF base was active during both World Wars and has been lovingly restored to its former glory. Now it's home to a raft of small companies restoring and caring for classic cars. You can't throw a stone around here without hitting some genuinely gorgeous metal. And nestled in amongst the classic aircraft, Bentley blowers and the odd Jaguar D-Type or two is a new manufacturer who's taking a classic page of British automotive history and breathing new life into it. Atalanta was one of the raft of car manufacturers that cropped up in the early 20th century, producing bespoke coach-built sports cars. Between 1936 and the start of the Second World War, only 22 cars were built, but they were praised for their handling and performance and competed in many of the motorsports of the day, including Le Mans. Now, here at Bicester Heritage, the name is making a return, and although this is a modern car, to the casual observer it feels like it has been plucked straight out of the pages of history. It has a lightweight aluminium chassis, suspension made to the original Atalanta design but with modern coilover shocks. The steering is unassisted and power comes from a naturally aspirated 2.5 litre 4-cylinder engine good for 214 horsepower and 198 foot-pounds of torque. The craftsmanship is stunning and attention to detail is amazing, but this thing has been built to be driven, not just to sit and look pretty. Although the basic checklist of things that a sports car needs hasn't changed much since the 1930s, modern cars are phenomenal pieces of engineering, and you don't really appreciate that until you step inside something that predates the hand-holding and nannying of modern rides.
Now, in the best possible way, this car feels old. The steering feels like it does on a vintage car. The brakes are not servo assisted, so if you want to stop, you have to really push. The suspension setup, although it can be dialed into your taste, gives this thing so much bump steer and floatiness at speed that it feels like you should be treating it with kid gloves because it's older than my granddad. The fact is, this car is brand spanking new. And that 2.5 litre Ford engine may be diminutive, but it's been tuned for performance and it sounds awesome. You have to respect classic cars and enjoy that experience it gives you. And in this case, a facsimile of it, because this has been built to feel classic. This is like pre-stressed jeans. This is that new vintage t-shirt of Guns N' Roses you can buy at your local supermarket, but built to the most exquisite standards. So a car with stylings of the early 20th century, but a modern engine, metal bodywork on an ash frame. Does that sound familiar? Yes, it sounds exactly like Morgan. That is how they've been building their cars for years. So how is this different? And that is a question you will definitely ask yourself when you hear the price tag, because this car will set you back £150,000.
And that is a bit of a shock, considering you could get a top-of-the-line Morgan Aero 8 fitted with a BMW V8 for 50 grand less. Both Atalanta and Morgan based the looks of their cars off that early 20th century sports car look, and as a result you could absolutely be forgiven for pointing this out to your mates as it drives by as Malvern's finest. You would, however, be wrong.
For starters, everything on this car is bespoke. Every last switch, every last bolt, everything has been custom made for this car. Nothing is from a parts bin. You're not going to find the gear knob from an old Rover in here or the switches from a Jag. No, this is completely Atalanta. But there is something else that makes this unique, that makes this different. And that's how the steering, The throttle, the brakes, the suspension all work together. And where a Resto mod or something like a Morgan wants to give you all of that classic look, but with a modern feel, that modern sense of security, modern performance, the Atalanta is trying something else. This doesn't feel like you're driving a modern car wrapped in the clothes of a classic. This feels like you've been transported back in time and you're actually driving a factory fresh car from the 30s. So this is not a car for someone who's purely after those vintage looks. You have to really want that classic drive feel of a car without necessarily having to babysit a classic, keep it in careful storage and meticulously maintain the vintage parts. This gives you the ability to drive something that feels vintage, feels classic, feels alive and historic, but just rolled off the factory. It's not for everyone.
For better or worse though, Atalanta is trying to do something different. It's not just trying to recreate the look of a bygone era, it's trying its best to recreate the entire driving experience. And really, it's the closest I've ever felt to driving a car from the 30s since I last drove a car from the 30s.
You don't have to be driving at speed to take advantage of that unique characteristic. Even at 30-mile-an-hour zones in little villages, you feel the suspension working hard, bumping you around. The design of it is very much inspired by the Atalanta cars of the past. And you forget very, very quickly that this is a modern car. Any car that has this much character at any speed is worth your attention.
The styling of the car inside and out is absolutely stunning, and I love that a forgotten name from British motoring history is resurfacing and reclaiming its place on our roads. But you really would need to know exactly what you want from a car before committing to putting your name down for one of these things. If you're just looking to pose next to a great looking ride, there are cheaper options that get you most of the way on looks and a lot further in terms of driving comfort and performance. But if you want to be transported to a bygone era every time you take your car out for a drive, and don't fancy digging around barns or blowing the family fortune at the auctioneers, then the Atalanta could be for you.